Alright, so let's go ahead and get started with using MongoKitten. We're going to start from scratch and create a new Swift server project with Vapor. So let's go ahead and open up Terminal, and then let's switch over to the desktop, and then let's create a new project called MongoKitten Tutorial. Oh, there we go. Alright. And now we can cd into that directory, and we can go ahead and open it up. So here you can see all of the files we're going to be working with. To get started with MongoKitten, well, first I should say that Vapor actually comes with MongoKitten within it, but MongoKitten is the group that's behind MongoKitten continues to come out with new stuff, and I think that the version that they've got on their official website is later than the version that is in the Vapor package. And so we're going to include the new MongoKitten in the Vapor package, or in the Swift project package file. So here we need to paste the package for MongoKitten. So you can follow along here. So let's jump over to the MongoKitten GitHub, and over here you'll have a handy little piece of text which you can simply paste into your package.swift file. So once you've got that in there, go ahead and hit save, and then we can close that out. We can come back to our terminal, and now we can use Vapor Xcode to create the new project with the latest MongoKitten, the latest public stable MongoKitten. Our Xcode project is done building, so let's go ahead and open that and switch over to main. Now, really quickly, let's just import MongoKitten here, and let's build the project, because it's going to take a while to kind of do that on the first time. And while that's doing that, I'd just like to mention that I'm going to be working with MongoKitten 3 here. I've heard that MongoKitten 4 is coming out soon, so keep in mind that not everything you see in this video may be relevant to the current version of MongoKitten that's out for you right now. If you're using a later version of MongoKitten, I would definitely recommend checking out some of their resources on their GitHub. They've got a link for tutorials so that you can kind of learn through just reading text there. And then they've also got a website for their documentation. This has a lot of good stuff in it. The tutorials are, they've actually got a pretty nice quick start, which, I'll probably be referencing while I am going through this with you. So let's keep that open, but jump back over to our project and just let this finish building. Alright, our build succeeded, so now we should be able to use any of the frameworks inside of this project just fine. I'm going to go ahead and use Command-Shift-J to show where we are in the project. And over here, I'm going to delete a couple things. We're not going to be using these here. They're just kind of stock stuff to mess around with if you're new to Vapor. We're not going to use that. So we'll get rid of those. And here, we are going to get rid of this. Alright, so now we can go ahead and leave this running. Let's switch over to the app, which is going to allow us to run our server, and go ahead and run that. Build succeeded. Soon it should show that it's running at our local host IP. Oh, working with the smaller screen. There it is. Alright, so I'm just going to copy this here, jump over to Safari, and we can see that if we go to that IP address that was provided, it's working. Let's go ahead and confirm that it's working with our own GET request. We're going to call this path hello. You might be familiar with this if you watched my last video on getting started with Vapor. Oops. Alright, so down here we can just return hello MongoKitten. Get rid of this here and run that again. Alright, and so if we come over here, add that path, we've got hello MongoKitten. So everything looks like it's running fine. now we can go ahead and start implementing MongoKitten. And so there's a bit of setup required here, especially if you're going to be working with a few different models and things. Today we're only going to work with one model, and that'll be a user model, a super basic user model. It's not even going to have a password property. But before we do that, we've got to get our Mongo server started. So up at the top, let's go ahead and we can do this under our server. We're going to say let server equal server Mongo URL, and here we're going to say MongoDB : localhost. Alright, so that's going to be our local host. Basically what this is doing is telling our project to look for a MongoDB server on the local host. If you're running your MongoDB server on a remote host somewhere with another IP address, make sure to include that there, but this is going to work fine for us. And then down here, we're going to need to reference a database within that MongoDB server. So let's go ahead and say let database equal, we'll say server, and let's call this database MongoKitten tutorial. Or let's just do MK tutorial for short. Alright, so now we've got a reference to our MongoDB server, and we've got a database. But there is one problem. We actually don't have our Mongo server running yet. And so this, I just want to emphasize real quick, the Mongo server, the database server, is actually something that runs separately from the Vapor backend, okay? So I didn't realize this when I was first starting out, but Mongo is its own server, and the nice thing about that is you can actually have your Vapor server running in one place and your Mongo server, your database, running in another place. And so if you don't know how to work with the MongoDB database yet, I would definitely encourage you to go ahead and look up some stuff on that. I'm just going to kind of breeze through using MongoDB here, but there's a bit of setup you'll need to do ahead of time if you haven't worked with MongoDB before. So, assuming that you have worked with MongoDB before, let's go ahead and get back to our terminal, and here we are just going to get that Mongo server going with MongoD. Alright, so we're running it at the default port. It's running on the local host, so that should be good to connect to. Now if we run our project, everything should work fine. And we're just going to test the same link. Yep, that works. Get rid of that. And that's still working too. So let me show you what happens if you have a Mongo server running. If you try to run this, this is actually going to crash here because it was expecting to find a MongoDB server at this local host that you provided, but because there isn't one running, in this case because we stopped the Mongo server from running, but in most cases it'll be because you haven't even started the Mongo server yet. If it can't connect to that server, if there is no Mongo server running, you're going to get a crash. So just thought I'd let you know because that can kind of trip you up on the first couple times you're working with this too. Now that you know that, let's go ahead and get the Mongo server running again and confirm that we can connect to it. Alright, the server is running with no problems. So now that we've got a connection to our MongoDB server going, let's go ahead and start setting up a model that we can use to kind of work with the Mongo server. So over here, I'm going to jump over to our models group and just create a new file. We can just use a blank Swift file here. We'll call this user. And in here, we are going to import MongoKitten and set up a struct for user. Alright, we can kind of write a few more things here. This is actually going to have some trouble referencing some of the other stuff in our main directory because when you're working with server-side Swift, new files don't really know about each other and the project doesn't really know about the new files until you rebuild the Xcode project file. But we can just throw in some stock stuff here real quick. So I know that I want to have a username, so we're going to add that username. It's going to be a type of string, and we're going to also add an email. We're just going to work with 2 strings here. Normally you can work with things like passwords, you can work with date created, you can work with all kinds of things, but we're just going to keep this simple here. And down here we're going to write an init that sets those up. Alright, and we're going to say self.username equals username, self.email equals email. Something to note about Mongo objects or documents is that they all contain an ID, and so we're going to need to store that here too. This ID is going to be a special type called object ID, and object ID is provided by MongoKitten. So we're also going to need to set that here. Let's go ahead and say self.id because we're creating a new object or a new document. So we're going to do that just by typing object ID. We're just going to initialize a brand new object ID with nothing special added to it. Alright, so that's pretty much all we need to do to initialize an object for our Mongo server. Now, this is where things are going to get a little bit weird. When I try to reference our server that we've got in the main file, we're going to have some trouble. I'm going to say let collection equal database, and we're going to call this user. So we're going to refer to a user collection within our database. If you aren't familiar with Mongo yet, a collection is basically a table. And you know those tables can have different rows, but instead of referring to them as tables, we refer to them as collections in MongoDB. It's basically the same thing though. Alright, so you can see that we're having some trouble here. What's it telling us? Unresolved identifier database. But if we go back here, we can see that we definitely have database within this project. This problem is happening because we need to create a new Xcode project. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to jump back over to our terminal. Let's load a new, not that. In our terminal, let's load a new window and let's cd to our project. Now we're just going to say vapor Xcode. Make sure you closed out the window for that Xcode project because things could probably get a little bit weird if you don't. Alright, so that was really fast. Our Xcode project is done being made. Let's go ahead and open it back up. Alright, and now we're back in our user. Yep, we're back in our user file, and you can see now, I think it's building right now, or at least indexing. Let's go ahead and hit build. You can see that this collection object should be okay now. We had a problem with it before, but it's resolved now because the project knows about this new file knows about the project. Alright, so we've got a basic user struct set up to be able to interface with our MongoDB server. Now let's get into the CRUD of working with this database, the create, read, update, and delete methods that we'll use to work with our Mongo database. So down here, let's separate things a little bit with a mark. We'll just say CRUD. Now we are going to write our first method for create. Now since this will be an instance method, we can call this on any user model object that we've created with that initializer. Now within our create method, we're going to want to reference the user collection that we specified above. And you know, I just realized that we made that outside of our user struct. Let's make sure we get it inside of it. And let's make sure that the same collection is being referenced everywhere by using a static. That way it's not specific to each instance of user. Alright, so down here we're going to say user.collection, and we're going to say update matching query. Here you can see we've got a lot of parameters to work with, but a lot of them are also optional, so you don't have to worry about too many of them. The first one we have to deal with is query. Query is actually going to be a reference to our object ID. So we're going to say let query equal underscore ID because we're working with Mongo database and they have an underscore before all of their IDs equals self ID. This is our query. In fact, right here we're going to need to do this here too, just to kind of make sure that the compiler knows that we're working with the right types. Down here we can go ahead and throw the query in. Now we need to use a document here. So a document is basically an entity. You've got your collection, which is like a table, and then you've got your rows, which are like documents, or like each entity that you're working with. Now there's no easy way to get a default document for your custom models, and so what you actually have to do is create a document property to work with, basically. So we're going to create a computed property here called document. And it's going to be of type document, something else that is supported by the MongoKitten framework. And in here we are going to return just basically a dictionary. This dictionary can be interpreted as a document. So let's go ahead and include our ID, self.id, our username, self.username. Don't know what happened there. Alright, and our email, self.email. Now this document can be added right here, just like this. But you don't actually want to put this document into this method because it actually doesn't need to contain the ID information. And so what I like to do is set up a document for save. That's going to be a document, and in here we can simply copy our document here like this and remove our ID value, just like that. And then down here we can switch that from document to document for save, just like that. I like to use my self-references. Alright, let's close this so we have more room to work with. Okay, now we've got some more room to work with. What other parameters do we have here? We've got upserting. So upserting provides some cool functionality. If a document with this ID exists inside of the MongoDB collection yet, if it does exist, it's going to update that object with the document that we provide. But if it doesn't exist, we can choose to upsert it in there. And all we have to do that is hit true for this. And now if a document with that ID doesn't exist, it's basically just going to insert this document with that ID into the collection. It's pretty handy. Alright, we've got a couple of other parameters here. Let's actually not worry about those right now because they're not really important for us in this case. And let's build this to make sure things are looking good. Build failed. Oh, so it's just letting us know that this can throw, so we're going to say try. And over here we're going to say throws so that we can pass that responsibility of handling the throw somewhere else. Alright, with that we should get a build succeed. Cool. I'm going to do one more thing just for clarity here. And then over here I want to point out that we are using an update method and a create method. The reason why we're doing this is because update kind of takes care of both creating new documents and updating existing documents. If we wanted only the functionality of creating something, we could just do user.collection.insert and we could throw in a new document, a brand new document. But you know, I think the extra functionality is nice, and so I always opt to use this update method even if I'm creating a new document. With this upserting ability here, there's not really any need to use the insert method, but it's nice to have, so there's that. And since this method can update documents that already exist within the database, you know, this is both our create and update method. And so I actually like to call this save because you can create a new object and you can save it. or you can get an existing object or document, edit it, and then save it. Either way, any changes that you make or any new objects you create, when you call save on them, like we've defined here, it's going to save it in your database. So this is kind of like two birds with one stone. So we've already got our create and update, but we're going to need a read. We're going to need a way to get information from our database. A good way to do that is with an initializer. Down here, let's create a new initializer with an ID string. There's a chance that this could fail, so let's make sure to throw throws up there. Before we do anything, we're going to need to make sure that that ID is interpreted as an object ID. So down here, let's say let object ID equal object ID, and in here we can just throw a string, the ID parameter that we've got, for instance. Alright, we've got our object ID. Now let's set up a query of type query to be equal to, it's just like before, underscore ID is equal to, in this case, object ID instead of self.id. And that's going to be the object ID we just created. Alright, now that we've got our query and object ID, let's go ahead and grab the user object from the database. We're not sure that we're going to get something out of it, so we're going to have to use a guard statement here. Guard let user equal user.collection find one matching, and we're going to try to find one that matches the user ID query that we set up here. Else, we're going to say, in this case, we'll just use fatal error, something quick and easy. I wouldn't recommend using this in your project because if you don't find a user, then the server is going to crash there. But in this case, we're going to make this easy on ourselves. Oh, and since this has the potential to throw, we're going to say try right there. Alright, now that we've got our user, let's try to get the information that we need out of there. In this case, it's going to be the username and email. So user here is a document object, and document objects allow the use of subscripts to pull information out of them, just like a dictionary does. So let's go ahead and try to get the username out of our user object here as a string. And I'm going to throw fatal error here. I don't recommend keeping that there again. That's just going to crash your app if it doesn't work out. So usually using this subscript would work. For some reason today, maybe it has something to do with a change in the MongoKitten library that I'm not aware of, but I'm not able to use a subscript on this user document. And so I think maybe an easy workaround for this could be accessing the dictionary value like this. Now, normally you don't need to access the dictionary value, but today we're just going to go ahead and try that and see how it works. Normally you can just use the subscript on the document. I don't know why you can't right now, but we're just going to keep on moving. Next, we're going to need to grab out the, the email. So we're going to say user.dictionary value again. In this case, normally you won't have to do that. And we're going to say email as string. Alright, so now we have got our username, we've got our email, and we've got an object ID to work with. All we need to do now is set our properties, and we've got a completed initialized user object. So let's go ahead and do that. Self.id equals object ID, self.username equals username, and self.email equals email. And with that, we have initialized a user object or entity based on a query. Hopefully that works. We'll test that in a little bit. Now we've got our create, our read, our update, and all we need is delete. So let's go ahead and write that. Functown delete. This has a chance to throw, so let's make sure we have that there. And now we're going to say try user.collection, user.collection.delete, or I think it's remove. Yeah. Remove matching query. Instead of creating a query value just like we did before, we can go ahead and define the query in here. We're just going to say underscore ID is equal to self.id. And that's all we really need to do to remove an object from our database. Now the instance will still be available to do things with, so you could actually save the instance again after deleting it from the database, but normally you'll just stop using the instance and it'll be forgotten in memory. Alright, so we've got all of our basic CRUD operations. Let's go ahead and jump over to our main file again. Now I did that with Command-Shift-O. If you don't know that shortcut, it's a really handy one, really good for navigating around projects. Let's create a path that will let us create a user. Up here we're going to say request in, and inside of this post user path, we are going to look for two things. We're going to look for a username and an email. So let's go ahead and set up a guard statement. Guard let username equal request dot data subscript username string. And we're also going to do the same thing for email. Request dot data subscript email string. Throw abort bad request. So if everything works out right, we'll get our username and email from here. And what we can do to actually create the user is reference our user class and throw the username and email in there. Let user equals try. So we've got that there. Now that we've got a user instance, let's call save on it. We're going to have to throw try there again. And now, just to confirm that everything worked out right, we can return a string giving us some details on that. Created user with username, user.username, and email, user.email. Alright. No, we actually don't need a try here. Now, if all of this works correctly, we should be able to create a new user. So let's jump over to Postman and go ahead and do that. We're going to submit a post request to our local host. You can see I've used this a few times, and the path we specified was user. Now, inside of that method, we are expecting two things, two strings, username and email. So let's go ahead and include those within our body. Username, here we're going to say, we'll use my name, David. And email, we'll use davidsites@me.com. Now we've got the parameters we need, we've got the path we need. It's a post request like we've defined here. So let's cross our fingers and see if this works. I'm just going to hit send. Oh, it didn't work. It didn't work because I didn't run the server. It's a little bit late tonight, and I'm forgetting things. But anyway, let's go ahead and see if it works now that we've got our server running. Hey, look at that. Created user with username David and email davidsites@me. So that user should exist within the database now. Let's just test that real quick. We're going to jump over to our terminal, get into our Mongo window here, our Mongo database window. Actually, this is the server for Mongo database. So we're actually going to need to create a new window and head over to Mongo. I think this is just Mongo. Yep, the Mongo shell here. Now we're going to list DB or show DBs and use mktutorial for MongoKitten tutorial. Now db.users.find, actually I think it's just user, that's how we named it, should return the user that we just created. Crossing our fingers. Are you crossing yours? Crossing mine, and nothing. Oh no. It says it didn't work. db.user.find. Oh, come on. Alright, I figured out why it didn't work. You might have noticed on the screen that I think I made a typo with the database. But now, as you can see here, I have switched to the MK tutorial database. And now let's see if the user object, the user document that we created for our Mongo database exists. We're going to try this again, db user find, and this time we should get our user information. There it is. All right, it's working. Everything we did worked, except for the part where I messed up and typed the database wrong. All right, so let's go ahead and find out if we can get that data out of our database with our server here. We can stop this for now. We're gonna slide that away. Let's create a path in main for retrieving a user. And here we're going to create a new path, get user request in, and now let's get the request from the header. Typically with get request you'll include data inside of a header, so we'll say guard let ID equal request dot headers, and here we're going to say, let's just say ID as, actually I think we'll have to do dot string, yep. And if that fails, we're going to abort with bad request. Alright, now let's retrieve our user with that ID, so we're going to say let user equal try user ID. If that works, our user should be contained within that value there. So let's just return the information we got with that ID. We'll say return user found with username, user.username, and email, user.email. Alright, so now we should be able to use a GET request with header information for the ID. We should be able to retrieve the user, and if all goes well, we will return the user's saved username and email for the browser. Alright, let's go ahead and test this out in Postman. So we're going to switch this to a GET request. Now in our header, we're going to look for we're going to provide an ID. Let's jump over to our terminal and grab the ID here. Throw that right there. We know what our ID is. Let's also, I just realized we've got two. Oh no, I was going to say we've got two user paths, but that's not true. We should be good there. All right. And so we've got our path. It's a GET request. We're providing the header that we need. I think everything's looking good. Let's go ahead and send this request. Oh, it didn't work, and it's because I forgot to run my server again. So now that we're running, let's go ahead and there we go. User found with username David and email davidsites@me.com. There you go. It's working. We provided a header value. We used that to retrieve a user based on the ID we provided, and then we pulled that information here out of the saved user that we retrieved. My mouse connection lost. It was lost. I'm a little bit lost now too. That's a lot of stuff, right? It took me a while to kind of set aside the time to record this video because I knew there was going to be a bit of work required. I don't know how long the video is right now because, quite frankly, I've got a lot of stuff to edit out. But really, I've been recording for about 2.5 hours now? That's a lot of time. I hope the video isn't nearly that long. I had a lot of troubleshooting to do, though. Setting this stuff up from scratch is a lot more work than maintaining it after you've initially set it up. But there you go. There you have it right there. Let's go ahead and test this out again. We're going to do a post, get rid of the header information. In the body, we're going to change the username to MongoKitten. And for the email, I have no idea what their email is, so I'm just going to say mongo@kitten.com. Ooh, that would be a great email domain. Alright, so let's go ahead and try to create this. Bam, we've got it. Created user with username MongoKitten and email mongo@kitten.com. Now let's make sure we can retrieve this from our server, our database. In our headers, we're going to provide an ID. I didn't return the ID there, so we're actually going to have to go to our database and pull that out. We're just going to do a find again. You can see we've got that account inside of our database, and the ID is right here. We're going to jump over to Postman. We're going to plug that in, and we are going to see if we can retrieve it. Oh, it didn't work. Why didn't it work? Oh, because even though I included the value here, I didn't actually include it in the request. So throw that check mark there. It just goes to show, it's not going to work if you don't provide the information. So let's go ahead and send that request again with the provided header information. And we've got our retrieved data. We were able to pull the username and the email out of the saved information from our database. And that's how you work with MongoDB in a Swift server using Vapor and MongoKitten. A huge thanks to the people who put all of this together. I really want to point out the fact that this is clean stuff compared to what you would be doing with something like Django or Ruby on Rails. This is really, really clean stuff. I also want to point out again that this thing with the dictionary value, I've reached out to Jonas, one of the guys behind MongoKitten. I don't think this is normally how you'll have to retrieve data from a document. Normally, like I said, you can use a subscript here, but things are being a little weird for me. I don't know what's going on. But, I mean, you can tell that even if things aren't working the way that you'd expect them to, there are small workarounds that you can kind of use. Anyway, I'm rambling now. I'm glad I was able to get all of this done in a video. Feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about how to use MongoKitten or Vapor. I can't tell you much about serving up, templates and things like that, but I can tell you a little bit about how to work with a database, specifically Mongo and MongoKitten. So I hope you guys enjoyed. Feel free to post any comments below. Let me know if you need help on anything else related to this stuff. I mean, as you can guess here, you've pretty much got everything you need between the Vapor server and Mongo to create your own API and start, saving data for your iOS app or your Android app or your web app. This is powerful stuff. All right, I really am rambling now. I'm going to end this. You guys have a great night. I'm going to call it a night myself right now. See ya.